Welcome, friends. This is Jesse Juarez with the Rotary Club of Seaside. You're watching a presentation which was recorded live on August 26, 2020, during one of our regular club meetings. Seaside Rotary meets via Zoom 2 times a month on the second and fourth Wednesday of each month from 12 noon to 1 p.m. Our meetings feature dynamic presentations from many of the movers and shakers that make Monterey County such a vibrant and hard-working community. If you'd like to join a meeting or learn more about our club and the work that we do, feel free to send us an email at seasiderotaryclub@gmail.com. Again, that's seasiderotaryclub@gmail.com. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more dynamic content.
Let me go ahead and give Mr. Steve McShane a chance to introduce our featured guest speaker.
Sure. All right. Well, I'm glad we're recording this. It's a very timely subject given how many people out there want to make a difference nationally, at the state level, and locally. There's never been more interest in just our government, really, given the role that government's played in the pandemic and our fires. Our guest speaker today has decades of experience in politics at all levels. Since the age of 12, knocking on doors, stuffing mailers, firsthand experience on state, national campaigns, having worked in DC, in the US Senate. She brings to the region a wealth of knowledge as to what it takes to bootstrap a local political campaign. Her passion is for first-time office holders, folks that are considered regular people, just like you and I, that want to help and move a community forward. Oftentimes people will say, well, how do I run for school board, or how do I go about city council? Well, Spark Campaigns has got the answer, and we have the principal behind Spark, someone I personally had a chance to work with. She's quite involved in the community through her faith and her church, as I've seen, but also as a founding board member and leader behind the Monterey Peninsula Young Professionals. It gives me a great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Miss Marieke Desmond.
Steve, thank you. He went above and beyond the bio. Thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here with you. Seaside Rotary has been one of my favorite Rotaries in Monterey, dare I say my favorite, and I'm sorry I haven't been able to join you more in the last few months. I recognize that I am in good company of people who are local electeds and leaders, and so feel free to message me if you think I'm getting something wrong or want to add something during the presentation. But I started Spark Campaigns during COVID because I wanted my friends to run for office. And many of them are normal parents, they are business leaders, they are people who are not political at the national level, but care deeply about their neighborhood, about the education that their kids are receiving, and want to make a difference. And what I found is the political system is so tricky and convoluted that political consultants who make a full-time living navigating that system wouldn't work in a lot of local races because there isn't very much money in those local races, which in some ways is a blessing because you have fewer political insiders running some of the local politics, but it does mean that for a lot of regular people, running for office is just out of reach. So I started Spark Campaigns, which is a 15-part video course. It's got their free website resources, things like a calendar of different things that you need to do if you're thinking about running for office, how to understand financial disclosures, things like that. But as I've been working with a few first-time candidates, I've realized that people, everyday people, have questions about elections too. So I'm excited to share with you a community guide to elections today. And I really love this community, and I found that the more people understand how to make a difference, the less powerless they feel, and the more they feel equipped to make a difference in everyday life. So Jesse, do you want to start our presentation? So as I've been working, I've worked in local elections, state elections, and in Washington, D.C. And I found that a lot of decision-making had already been done before bills would come to Washington, D.C. And that made me really frustrated. It felt like everyday people didn't have a voice, and the national party politics was only benefiting from divisiveness. And local elections, I find, are a an antidote to that, where you can sit down with someone you disagree with on national politics and you both care about what's happening in your backyard, and you're both looking at solutions to build a future for you, for your family, for your community. So this is my guide to community elections. Jesse, go ahead. All right, so in 69 days, you will be making a lot of decisions along with other residents in Seaside. You're deciding 2 city council seats. Alyssa will be sorry to see you go. You'll decide the mayor for Seaside, a school board seat that represents not only Seaside, but Sand City and Delray Oaks. You're going to decide 1 Monterey Peninsula College trustee, 1 Monterey Airport District Board member, 1 supervisor, an assembly member, a state senator, a congressional seat, and all kinds of propositions and some bond measures. And that's not all. It's a lot of decision making coming up. And the craziest part of it, Jess, go ahead to the next slide,
You got it.
is that many of those positions are part-time, non-professional leaders making decisions that affect your taxes, the infrastructure, and even the curriculum that your children will be learning in whatever mode school will continue to exist in the future. Each board, there's so many other boards I haven't mentioned. The County Office of Education has a seat up for election. Water District has some seats up for election, although not the seat that represents Seaside. But regardless of the type of board or commission, every elected or appointed position has 3 main responsibilities. They oversee taxpayer money, they oversee and pass new policy, and they are the liaison between the public and government. And each of those things sounds kind of trivial, but the median city budget in America is $800 million. And as we're going to learn, the airport district budget is larger than the Seaside city budget. So the money that they're overseeing is significant money, even for these local elections. And then new policy, it can be as little as what the parking meters downtown are going to cost, which is very controversial, I know. But it can also be whether our kids go to school in person or not, or how we're going to look at community safety in the future. And lastly, liaising between the public and the government. These are our representatives who represent everyday people, making sense of government, new statutes, and they're not only representing us, but they're also translating what the government is telling them from, state and federal levels too. Jess, go ahead to the next slide.
Okay.
So an example of this is MPUSD, which is the school board district. The MPUSD board members oversee a budget of $93 million. That includes infrastructure projects, it includes payroll for all the employees in the district. It's a lot of money, and they oversee every dollar of that, how it gets spent. They also decide the policies that govern that school district. They decided how our kids wouldn't go back to school this year. They also have to implement state standards for education at our local elementary and middle school and high schools. I don't know if you know this, and I don't have children yet, but some of my friends have gone in person to MPUSD's headquarters because they have all the different syllabus and curricula standards in person at the office. So if you're ever curious about the new civics class that's being proposed, or other new pieces of the curricula, you can always see it in person. And MPUSD, the school board district, are part-time, non-professional leaders who are helping implement those decisions into our local schools. And lastly, MPUSD board members have an important job of representing parents and taxpayers and the students and teachers and administrators. And you can imagine keeping all of those groups happy is a challenging job. Jess, could you go to the next slide? So a quick overview of elections. Most elections are run and overseen by either the city or the county. If it's a city office, so the mayor or city council members, the city will handle those elections. You can find the documents we're going to talk about at city elections office or the city clerk. But for some of these, like the airport district or MPUSD, those positions represent an area that's bigger than just the city, and those are run by county elections. So many of the documents you need or are interested in, you'll find at the county level. It turns out there aren't a lot of requirements to running for office. You usually have to live in the area. You have to have not been convicted of a felony specifically associated with bribery. For some reason, from California to North Carolina, it's not felons in particular, but felonies associated with bribery that disqualify you. And you have to be able to fulfill the duties of the office if elected. Okay. A couple of pieces of vocabulary. I know many of the people who've run for office in this group are very familiar with these, but in case you're not, so filing is how you make it official. It's the documents that you file with either the city or the county elections office that not only include your proof of residence, but they also include some important financial disclosures. So any person who runs for public office in California has to file a 700. And that form tells the public where your income comes from. And that it's very annoying for many people to fill in because you have to do any property that you own or assets that you have, but it makes sure it helps us voters and taxpayers see where your income comes from and how that might affect the way that you vote. So if you're ever curious, you can find some very interesting things looking through people's 700s. Then once they've filed for office, they have to keep track of all of the funds they raise and spend as a candidate. And those forms there are deadlines for those forms. Those are called 460s. So any dollar that a candidate raises or spends must be accounted for and must be released to the public. And again, you can find those either at the city or the county level, some even at the state. A ballot designation is the title that you want to have on the ballot itself. And there are all kinds of regulations about what you can and can't say. Very interesting. And the ballot statement is the 250 or 200 words that a candidate pays for to include in the voter guide. And I did a little bit of research this morning. An MPC trustee has to spend $379 for that amount. The airport district spends more than $239 for those words. And a supervisorial candidate has to spend more than $1,000 to say 200 words of introduction to voters in that voter guide. So that's not always a small amount. And lastly, an endorsement. An endorsement is a verbal commitment of support. And it's a way to, especially for first time or lesser known candidates, it's a way for someone that you know to tell you, I support this person, even if you don't know that person very well. So it's a very big deal in elections. Next slide, Jess. So I wanted to talk about money in two different ways. I want to talk about money during elections and money after elections. And I always try to tell people money is not an ends in itself. It's a means to an ends. Money is only helpful insofar as it helps get you votes. Money is not helpful in your bank account. So when candidates are raising money, they're raising it so that they can amplify their message and reach voters. But there are plenty of ways you can win elections without raising a lot of money. Last night, I got a visit from one of the members of this group knocking on my door and walking precincts. And that is a very effective way to win votes that doesn't require a lot of money. The other helpful means to an end is money demonstrates support. So money is a way for people to buy into your message, to support your vision for the community. It's a really important way to have buy-in from your community that what your vision for the future is, they not only support in word, but support financially as well. So there are a couple of different guidelines for contributions in California. And the state has one level, and then individual jurisdictions can impose even more limits on that. So for instance, the California state limit is $4,700 per person. Now, I can give that amount to a candidate. My husband can give that same amount to the same candidate. And then if we have a business, we can even give another amount to that candidate. But the limit is $4,700. In some jurisdictions, like Monterey City Council, there's an even more strict limit on how much individuals can contribute. I think it's $500 in Monterey. And of course, any dollar that a candidate receives for their campaign or spends on behalf of their campaign must be recorded, must be released to the public. Okay, next slide, Jess. This is a great slide if you're interested in this information. Here are 3 places you can find those financial records publicly. The Secretary of State will have statewide races or some bigger races. And then the Monterey County Elections Office, it can be hard to navigate their website, but this page, you can click directly on the public portal for campaign finance, and then you can search by people's names. You can search by zip codes, things like that. Very interesting. In Seaside, you have to request those records either in person or via email. And if you want them printed, sometimes there will be a small fee associated with it, but you can't access those electronically yet, or you can't access them online. Okay, Jess, the next slide is a demonstration of how you look at a 460. I thought it would be interesting to show you, when we work in politics, we look at these all day long, but they're actually kind of hard to understand. So I wanted to walk you through, this is an old 460 from a high school district trustee in Salinas. All the financial disclosure forms for the state are the same. And so there are some pieces of this form that don't apply to this school board race, but I wanted to show you regardless so you could see. So at the top, you've got the time period that the statement covers. So even though this form is filed afterwards, it's only going to show you donations and expenses between September 23rd, 2018 and October 20th, 2018. And in each of these forms, there's a contributions received section, which has in column A, how much was received during that time period. And column B has a year to date, which is very interesting to see. And then there's the expenditures made, which is an interesting as well, column A in that time period, column B year to date. There's lots of other pieces of that, but that's the most helpful thing to know. This is the title page for every 460 will look something like this. And this is how at a glance, you can understand somebody's financial campaign fundraising. The next page is going to be a breakdown of the specific donations that were received. And this page I picked because it's the most complicated page because it doesn't just have individual donors. So in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see the different contributor codes. And those codes are short for different kinds of groups that can contribute to a campaign. So if I personally gave money, my name, my employer, and my occupation would show up in that second column, and I would be an individual contributor. So it would be check marked the box IND. These 4 groups are not independent or individual contributors. They are political committees. So these are groups that can give more money than an individual can, and they're on file, they're on record with the Secretary of State as financial committees, which sounds complicated, but it's a way of saying it's a more anonymous way to give, and they can give more money than individuals themselves. So that's always interesting to see too. And I was struck when I was first looking through this that I wasn't sure why a building and construction trades council would be interested in a school board race. But it's always interesting to see, what do they have to gain? What's their interest in this specific school board district? And what does that mean for his future decision making? Jess, next slide. Okay, so then once you get into office, there's a whole different set of money matters. And most people do not get into political office for the money. As you can see, Seaside City Council members receive $400 a month, which is not very much. And I think it's the same amount that the mayor receives. Do you know if that's right, Alyssa?
I am not sure, actually. Good question.
I'm pretty sure it's the same amount. So it's not very much, like you're told for how many hours of work you put in. That's not a lot of money. NPUSD members, I don't believe receive any compensation. Water district members receive around $5,000 a year, and they're compensated on a certain amount per session. I think they meet once a month for a bunch of hours. Is that the same for Monterey Airport District, Lisa? Yes.
Most
okay.
boards will compensate you for, say $50 for each session that you meet, or $100 or whatever it is.
And that each board has a slightly different amount, and they pass that, and so you have to look into their bylaws to find out exactly what the standard is. Board of Supervisors are a full-time job, and so they receive slightly different amounts, but around $140,000 a year. And all of this you can find on Transparency California, which is a nonprofit group that tracks taxpayer monies for different offices, including retirements and benefits for those public offices. Quick poll, who do you think makes the most money? What profession do you think makes the most money in Monterey County? Does anyone know? I only looked it up because I was wondering about this, and it's a surgeon at, I think at Natividad, makes a lot of money. But it's because it's a highly qualified, important position that you need a lot of training for. Okay, next slide. So this is, I didn't include all the different boards, but I thought this would be a helpful overview of the different representatives that you have and how to follow along with each meeting. One of the best benefits of COVID is that we have made all of these meetings easy to attend virtually. So whether you are, cooking dinner or at home in comfy clothes, you can tune in and see what's going on. Every public meeting has to have an agenda posted ahead of time. And so you can always scan and see if there are any issues that you think are important to see and hear the discussion about. And there are ways that you can send in comments for each of those. How many of you have attended or listened to any of these boards who are not members of the boards themselves? Yeah. Yeah. It's very interesting to watch, and it's once you start, it gets more and more familiar once you understand the language that they're using, the Robert's Rules of Orders. Each of the representatives that has an asterisk next to it is a position that's up for election in November. Some of these individuals are not running again, and some of them are, but you can find out more about each of them through the elections office or through looking up the individual candidates. Okay, I think we have the last slide. So there are different ways you can get involved. It's really important to know that the taxes that you're paying or the way that you are educating your kids, all of those things are things you can affect. They're issues that you can have a voice in, that your voice matters. Check your voter registration, make sure you're registered to vote. Take that responsibility seriously because things don't change unless we help make them change. I encourage you to attend board meetings. I used to think that the water board district was kind of a non-essential or not as an interesting group to follow, but as I've been learning more about Upper Broadway and about some of the different developments around our county, our water district is the one that allots a certain amount of water credits for those developments, has a ton of power or it can really affect the kinds of businesses that can open, the kinds of developments we can build. So it's very interesting to follow those and see what's going on. And then consider holding office, even if it's an appointed position or a volunteer committee. There's nothing like getting involved to really make a difference and see how the decision making is happening. So that's my email below, hello@sparkcampaigns.com. And I would love to take any questions or any corrections. And I'm grateful to be here with you today.
Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and end the screen share function here. Bear with me for the technical issues there. Fantastic. All right. And I'm going to check the chat box window here. One note, got here that the airport directors do get $105 stipend per meeting. And then after that, looks like we have another question. Any thoughts on the recall effort in Seaside? What is your political analysis? How would you advise the parties involved in that situation?
Whew. That's not the warm-up question. Yeah, it's a very interesting look at how does a community resolve differences. And When you lose trust in an elected official, when you no longer feel like that official is working for you, but they're working for some other interest or against your own wishes, that is a very real tool that voters have at their disposal to make that feeling known. I always think that messaging is a big part of this, and I think that there are some ways that a certain city council member could have done a different job messaging to build bridges instead of creating tension in the community. But at the end of the day, if you disagree with how your representative is representing you, if you lose trust in them, that is a tool at your disposal to use. So yeah, I don't know if I have more of a political analysis than that, but it's one of the real parts. I think about, for instance, the school districts. School boards have to balance the interests of students, the interests of teachers, and the concerns of parents. I mean, that is a trifecta of difficult parties, and you have to balance that. Or even, the different community colleges, the interests of a student is very different than the interest of a tuition payer, and that's very different from the interest of a professor. And each of those is somehow being overseen by this group of part-time leaders. So it definitely, it's not an easy task all around. But Steve, so many good campaign questions. So I think social media is huge in campaigns. I find each social media has a different use. Frankly, I find Twitter is a fantastic way to communicate with journalists and a not fantastic way to communicate with voters. I don't think that most people want to be told that they're wrong. I think most people want to trust that their leaders are listening to them. And for some reason, I find a lot of people who run for higher political office want to be right more than they want to listen, or at least they communicate that they want to be right more than they want to listen. Mark, you say you read campaign mail from candidates I've heard about, already know. Agreed. A lot of campaign mail just goes straight into the recycling bin. And there's always something about them that makes you not trust them. Like, you don't trust that they're really telling you what you need to know. They're telling you what they want you to know, which makes me not feel like they're effective. Yes, the campaign finance reform efforts are really interesting to Lisa's question. Monterey did pass one, and they passed a $500 limit, I believe, per contribution. And this election cycle, we've seen much lower finance money raised. I think it will force candidates to be more creative and probably get out into the public more, because they can't hire people to walk for them or even do some of the ads that they might have in the past. And then I also want to just talk about ads and how to balance ads. I work in messaging, and I've worked in communications one way or another for most of my life. I actually worked in journalism before, and everyone is biased. It's very difficult to separate your bias because it's so hard to even identify your own bias. So when you're reading about candidates, I highly recommend reading the worst thing that people on both sides have to say about each other, because that's probably closer to the truth. It's good to hear what the people who endorse them say too, but yeah, it's just tricky to know. It's tricky to know what to believe when everybody's got a bias, including, unfortunately, newspapers, because they're written by people. Phone banking, I think, is really important. I keep seeing at the national level that people want to do peer-to-peer texting. I think it's super obnoxious. I don't know if you've all received texts from different political campaigns or even, big causes, but I don't find that compelling. I find it kind of invasive. And so there's this challenge of how do you get in front of people, make sure that they're listening, really get their attention, but do it in a way that doesn't leave a bad taste in their mouth. And one of the biggest ways I've seen that is giving them information that they really care about. So anytime you can tell people about the issues that are happening in the board that you're sitting on, I think people want to know and they want to feel like they have a seat at the table. And that's more effective to me than just telling someone about your own accomplishments or, a glossy picture. This is a great question, Steve. How would you describe the 30-year-old and younger voter? How do you reach and help to turn out younger voters and the voting age to 16? I was actually somebody who came out and spoke against the voting age to 16, not because I don't think 16-year-olds are capable of deep thoughts, but because many of them would be voting to change laws that they wouldn't even be held accountable to. They would be changing laws that they weren't governed by. And that to me is like anti-democratic. That is the essence of anti-democracy. Like if you're changing a law that doesn't actually, that you're not governed by, that feels like it's, I don't think that's a good idea. But I also don't want 16-year-olds to have to pay taxes and be conscripted into armies. So the 30-year-old and younger voter is very issues driven. I think a lot of people are starting to understand some of the implications of policy, but slowly. I've got friends who've started their own businesses and are starting to understand taxes for the first time. People who are having children and understanding what school education means for their kids. And so it's interesting to see them learning the practical sides of that I think my parents understood earlier than I did. So they're issues driven. I think social justice is very important to them. Environmental justice is important to them, but they're also starting to realize the practical costs of some of those issues and what it means when they're the ones who are paying for that. And that's a very interesting thing to see. They care a lot about knowing the candidate and having a relationship with them too, I think. Mark, that's a great question. What is your favorite source of a person's voting track record? And what is a quick way to identify conflicts of interest before that big pre-vote packet is mailed? That's a very good question. The voting records can be hard to find because I find, especially on committees or councils, by the time members have all talked about an issue, unless they have serious concerns about it, it always ends up in a unanimous vote. So a voting record is actually very difficult to track. What is more helpful to track is which issues those individuals have championed or introduced. You can see what they really care about, and really listening to board meetings. I think that's important to listen to board meetings to get a feel for that. I'm not sure how to do the conflicts of interest besides parsing their financial records. Unfortunately, as in local elections, the best part of local elections is that your personal relationships matter. The worst part of local elections is that your personal relationships matter. And so a lot of people say, if you're associated with this person, then that must mean this. And that's not always true. Sometimes it's helpful to have a relationship with someone so that you can hear what's actually going on in that industry or that company and gain perspective from them, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're in their pocket. And that subtlety can be lost on some people. Steve, local offices are supposed to be nonpartisan. What role does the major political party have in local races? Should there be a role? Well, last night I was listening in on some of the conversations at the Democratic Central Committee because they're struggling to endorse folks in some of the races and in local races. And what I heard was it was really, really hard. It was not a productive conversation. And what it made me realize is that these local races, it's harder to peg them in national party terms because water credits are not Democratic or Republican, and green energy are not necessarily Democratic or Republican, or school education curricula. And so when the parties get involved, they end up bringing some of their own issues to the table in a way that doesn't help. I don't think it helps candidates or communities move forward. For instance, the Building Trades and Labor Council asked candidates for local races positions on abortion, which is, it's fine to ask someone what their position on something is, but if you're telling me that a Monterey City Council member is going to have any effect on Roe versus Wade, you're joking. That's not, you have no authority in that area, and you may personally be interested in their opinion, but a buildings council especially, like that's not even in there. That's an issue, that's a national issue, that's a political party issue that they're bringing into a local race. I find that really unhelpful. I find that divisive, and that they're using political fury for their own ends. So I don't know if there should be a role for national parties. I find it simpler when it's just, hi, I'm your neighbor. This is an issue that I care about. What do you think about it? Do you like the way that we're doing this? I think that's a much more effective way to move a community forward. And on the tax return, I don't know. I think it wouldn't. The more he hides it, the more it feels like he's got something to hide. That's a great question. A typical political consultant, what will they charge for his or her service, and what are their responsibilities? So, political consultants have a couple of things that they do that they bring to the table. They usually know a lot of people. They know the person to ask for an endorsement at each union. They understand who the player is in this city, and you need this person's endorsement, and you need to be pictured at this event. One of the political consultants was telling me that they couldn't get Jimmy Panetta to endorse someone, but that person could show up randomly at this event that Jimmy Panetta was at. That's what political consultants do, and they charge anywhere from $60 to more to an hour, or can charge thousands of dollars a month. They can do a retainer fee of like $1,600 or more to help you figure out which votes you need, how many votes you need, and how to get the support from the community. One of the things that really frustrates me about politics is that generally the people whose voices are loudest and who have the most influence are the people who are at the fringes of an issue, because you may not get involved until you really, really, really hate this one development project, or you really, really, really like this one system of solving the water crisis on the peninsula. And so if you feel this strongly about something, you're more likely to put money into the campaign and to have a voice in that election. But there are many of us who are in the middle who don't have that strong feeling about issues. And I try to tell my friends, the best way you can keep the fringes from not taking over politics is by getting involved, is by giving money to candidates that you think are reasonable, that are willing to listen to both sides, that are thoughtful, that are not governed by a political party, but are really thinking about their community. And by giving money and knowing their names, like having a relationship with those candidates. So that's one of the things I have found in local politics and national politics. The loudest people, the people who are most engaged, tend to be furthest on the edges, and to mobilize reasonable, moderate people requires them to get involved and to show up. So yeah, those are a couple of my thoughts.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Does anyone else have any further questions? All right. Well, I'd like to second Steve's comment in the chat window there. Great job, Marieke. I really applaud this presentation here. I think when we talked earlier this week, you had mentioned that you really wanted to give a presentation that can give people some sense of a better understanding of how these elections, how these ballot initiatives, how they spring up, how they grow naturally, and just all the different moving parts that go into it. So I really applaud that. Thank you. Thank you so much.
And I think everybody who has run for office or who has served, I know it's a grueling, thankless task. So thank you all for leading in our community, and it's very appreciated.